Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How are you all?
How's it going out there?
Already got quite a few people hanging out with us in the chat. Thanks for coming today, guys.
Good to see you all.
Hope your weeks are going well.
We are excited to talk about probably I think it's my new favorite novel. I'm gonna have to read it again, I think, which OG darn, but it's in all likelihood gonna be my new favorite.
How many canon novels have you reread?
Ooh, I've reread
Aftermath, obviously.
obviously, yeah. Although I haven't reread him, I'm rereading Empire's End for the first time now.
Mm.
I've reread Catalyst also. I've reread Bloodline.
You read Ahsoka twice.
I've read Ahsoka twice. I might have reread. I think I reread Lost Stars. I feel like I reread Lost Stars. I think that might be it. I want to reread Phasma and Wanda, but rereading is usually, unless I'm doing it for the books, it is second priority usually.
Right. Well, like the stream title should tell you, we are discussing Master and Apprentice today, like we said. So
Yes.
we will give you a fair warning that this is going to be a spoilery discussion.
Very.
So if you want a spoiler-free review of that, we've had one up on the channel.
It
you can
should
go
be
check
linked
that out.
should be linked in the description.
And then you can come back to the VOD later on if you want to avoid spoilers. But from here on out,
there will be
warned.
spoils.
Yep.
Spoils of war.
Yep. There be spoilers here.
Good. Yep. But yeah, I mean, the biggest one, really, I loved this book. The end made me weep. It was just to jump ahead. I got to the end and I was like, but this, I couldn't have had higher expectations for this book either, and I loved all of it.
And I think that was, I try to be cautious, especially after what I feel like The Last Jedi taught us about expectations.
Right.
But ever since this book was announced, I had high expectations of it, and I feel like it delivered in some pretty real ways, and in ways that I wasn't expecting, as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And sorry, Claudia Gray, it wouldn't have been as good, first of all. But yes, Claudia is our queen, Sen. She is our queen. But there were things that were happening in it where I would have been nervous. I would have been like, okay, I don't know how they're going to portray this, or I don't know how they're going to handle this character. And it was never bad and it was never wrong, but I'm like, they're getting into some stuff that is really touchy and personal for me in Star Wars. And then by the end of it, I was like, nope, this is handled perfectly.
Right.
And I held on, and I didn't get really nervous because it's Claudia Gray.
Right.
And she has earned my trust from her 3 other novels, which, for those of you who are not familiar, she wrote Bloodline, Lost Stars, and Leia, Princess of Alderaan. All 3 are amazing.
Right.
Out of those 3, I like Bloodline the most, although I feel like most people say Lost Stars. But I love all 3 of them.
I mean, I feel like when I read Lost Stars, it was probably my favorite Star Wars book I'd ever read before. But I really it's hard to put my finger on why. I think part of it is just original trilogy nostalgia, and I feel like it kind of has that going for it in ways that Bloodline didn't. But yeah,
that's a whole one day when we just have the Claudia Gray themed stream. But this one, what I say in my spoiler-free reviews, I grew up reading the Jedi Apprentice chapbooks, and they were all about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan during this time, and I really wanted this book to capture that again. And I'd heard Claudia Gray speak, and she had said she had read all of those as well, so that was something that was she was cognizant of in her mind.
Right.
And that made me really happy, and that for anybody who's read both, definitely came through in the book, but not in a like copy and paste, she just stole material sort of way, because the story's completely different.
Right.
And like the struggles they go through in their relationship are similar themes, but they happen in a very different context. So she's not like ripping anything off, but she is referencing a really rich part of Legends lore that I appreciated.
Right. And speaking of lore, Midway and John in the chat are both talking about how they liked the use of prophecy in this book. And there's it's a topic that's kind of hard to avoid when you talk about Master and Apprentice. And if assuming I ever have time again for things, I wanted to do a video, maybe an article would just be better, talking about like the nature of prophecy and stuff like that. But you and I talked about this some, and Midway points out that some of the prophecies seem to be like specific references to like things in Star Wars, and we've talked about how, one, that's easy to do when like you're writing them, especially when you're writing them after the fact. But what did you think of like the use of prophecy or particular prophecies? What did you think about that?
I think what I gravitated to in the book more than the specific prophecies, and I know a lot of people who are like trying to parse out the specific prophecies and find out what they mean, and that's totally great. I totally get why people would want to do that. What I attached to was more the Jedi freak that I am, the Jedi's relationship with prophecy and what they meant. So that was really how I connected to it. Seeing Qui-Gon's journey with it, seeing some of Dooku's journey with it, Rael's journey with it, the Jedi Council's journey with it, and just the nature of how Qui-Gon's visions played out. I really loved, because prophecy is such an interesting thing. And you and I have had so many discussions off stream about it before this book even. And I liked seeing Qui-Gon struggle with this, and that was something I really appreciate about him reading in the novel. Is it's really easy to take a character like Qui-Gon and see him as a paragon of what a Jedi should be, which I think he's the closest thing we see in the prequel trilogy. But the fact that he was still this paragon of what a Jedi should be, and yet he was still really flawed, and not just flawed, but learning, and watching Qui-Gon learn was fascinating to me. So that's what I really liked about how the prophecies played out, is seeing him see this vision over and over again, and the choices he was making because of it, and seeing him learn that the process of letting go as he was receiving it. So that was my relationship with it.
And I really enjoyed the idea of prophecy in this way too. And kind of like you say, you get to see like the different characters, not necessarily interpretation of prophecy, but like what their relationship to the idea of prophecy is. And it really is interesting to me to think, because one of the things that the council emphasizes is, and we kind of get this both from the council and then kind of through Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's discussion, even Rael's conversation, like this is kind of what the Jedi stance on prophecy is. And they just see them as these kind of really idiosyncratic things that, you know, how kind of quaint almost it is that they exist. And the default belief seems to think that, you know, this is really just about, like, they're not referencing the future so much as commenting on things that happened contemporaneously with when they were written. And I like that the book gives Qui-Gon a practical reason to rethink that. He doesn't rethink it, like it's not just a philosophical point. He doesn't just have a different view of the prophecies. Like the Force has revealed itself to him in a way where he kind of gets it. And he gets it for like real like reasons. And even Obi-Wan says, I don't get it the way that you do. But I mean, by the end of the book, at least, he trusts Qui-Gon enough to kind of go with it. But I like that it was different than that. And I like that it's not just about what is the interpretation of this prophecy, but like what are we supposed to do with prophecy? Like how, are we supposed to ignore it? Are we supposed to consider it? Or even just the distinction between like using prophecy or the way the Force can let you glimpse the future as a way of like manipulating the
Right.
future and like profiting, not necessarily monetarily, but like benefiting from your knowledge of the future compared to
Mm-hmm.
like um, knowing it and reacting to it.
Yeah.
Um, and or like the difference between willfully seeking it out, which is what we
Yep.
see characters like Palpatine do, versus
Yep.
Qui-Gon just has a vision. Like
Right.
he can't not have a vision. The Force gave him
Right.
one. So what I mean, do you agree with that or like?
Yeah, and that was something that was cool for me to read because I had done that Balance of the Force series a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it done a discussion on Force visions and had pointed out the difference in seeking a vision of the future versus just receiving one, and I do think that's a big difference, because the idea that's presented is that if you are seeking to know the future, you are seeking to control the future,
Right.
and the point of a Jedi is to not have control but to listen to the Force, and that and I feel like that is kind of the path that Qui-Gon goes on in the book, but not from a dark sidey, power hungry need to control, but from a desire to do the right thing, and that desire to do the right thing and change the outcome. And I think the most Qui-Gon thought process in the whole book is after everything is said and done. The big climax at the end, you learn that Qui-Gon didn't actually, like, the vision he got didn't give him the full picture and didn't
Right.
reveal who the true enemy was. And as a result, Qui-Gon thought he was standing next to the true enemy, and he inadvertently put Obi-Wan right next to the true enemy. But everything worked out, and then Qui-Gon goes, I think I was supposed to misinterpret the vision, because if I misinterpreted the vision, that was the only way it could actually happen. And I'm like, boy, that is the most Qui-Gon thing I've ever heard in my life.
I mean, but
It
I
made me
think you're
laugh.
right about that. But at the same time, like that's a lot of what interpretation of prophecy is.
Yeah, yeah,
It's we didn't understand it, but what we got out of it meant something to us. Um, I don't know. I think there's so much there. I mean, and I'm kind of like you too. I'm like I think it's fine if people want to parse out the individual prophecies, and I
right,
think that's cool. When I read it, I was like, oh, I bet this is a reference to Rey. This
right.
this has got to be a Palpatine thing, especially now that we know, he's going to be back in some kind of form.
Yeah,
Um, but I think what got me more is just like the way they use prophecy as both like a tool, like a narrative tool, but also
mm-hmm.
like a story like in the narrative tool.
Yeah.
Um,
And that, to me, played into a larger thing that the book talks about. And this is my favorite thing. I recently went on a rant about this on Twitter. This is the thing I've been saying to anyone who would listen to me for almost 20 years now, is just how complicated the politics and the role of the Jedi within those politics is in the prequel trilogy. And I think that prophecy kind of ties into this too, because there's the larger question of just how far away from the true following of the Force were the prequel era Jedi.
mm-hmm.
Like, how far were they completely lost? When did they completely lose their way? That sort of thing. And I think prophecy ties into that, where you get, hundreds of years ago, there were all these Jedi seers who
Right.
would regularly have these books of prophecy come from Jedi that were regularly either receiving visions or searching them out. And then we hit a point where the Jedi have basically looking at prophecy altogether. Looking at prophecy caused these problems.
Right.
And that's so quintessential to what the prequel era Jedi's problem is to me,
mm-hmm.
is they were like, okay, this issue causes problems, therefore we should completely avoid it and not learn how to do it any better. So prophecy causes people to go to the dark side, therefore we shouldn't have prophecy.
Right.
You see it with fear. Yoda's fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate. The Jedi were like, okay, well, you should never be afraid ever, because that's how that works.
Right.
And as a result, they kind of became afraid of fear, and that's part of what blinded them. And then if you go to Legends, which this book references a lot stuff. Anyway, I know you can't always go to Legends, but it used to be in the old days. that the Jedi Order didn't always have a ban on family.
Right.
That kind of happened around the KOTOR game, and that stories that happened before the KOTOR game, Jedi knew their families. And to me, that was always the Jedi knew their families, and that caused problems. So the Jedi were like, no, you don't get to know your families now. And it's just been such a Jedi problem to, instead of addressing an issue, learning how to handle it, just cutting it out. Mm-hmm. And again, I feel like everyone else is like, the prophecies though, and I'm like, but I love what it says about the Jedi Order as a whole.
Right.
And that's been my rant. But anyway,
well,
that was
and like tirade. It gets at the, and again, I've been saying this, at least since Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
Also, but like, it can both be true that Anakin is the fulfillment of the Chosen One prophecy, and that the Jedi misunderstood it.
Mm-hmm.
Like those two things aren't mutually exclusive, and I think this book kind of demonstrates that point too. Is that what Qui-Gon saw was a glimpse of the future, but what he did with it was different, and like in thinking about it, made it different.
Yep.
And so like when a prophecy is given, your response to it, at least how we see it presented in the Star Wars universe, like your response to a glimpse of the future can change the future that you've been given a glimpse of.
Right.
And, or even, like Luke gets a vision.
Directive? Is that a reference I'm allowed to make?
Sure. I mean, I'm down with talking Star Trek whenever you want to, but
that's like the only Star Trek reference I can make.
But like even when Luke gets a vision of the future in Empire, like he sees his friends in danger, and his friends are in danger, and so he goes to save them, but he really doesn't. Like that doesn't change the future, but it's complicated. And I think that's, you and I were talking about this yesterday, and that's what we kept saying is it's also complicated, and this book kind of lets it be complicated and doesn't try to like solve all the complications of it. It just kind of acknowledges that it is complicated and lets it be.
I feel like the spirit animal of the prequel trilogy is Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's complicated.
Well, that's a reference I don't get. The only Avatar I know involves blue people.
Hey, Poe, welcome. Well, don't worry, you'll get more of those movies soon, Django.
Yeah, sure.
All the Avatar movies you've ever wanted.
If you say so.
To see Great Canadian Guy in chat says Jedi are compromised by their order and tradition and direct involvement in the daily galactic politics, and boy does this book get into that too.
Yeah.
So much so. And we can get to that. I don't know if we're necessarily done with talking about the prophecy portion, but that's definitely a thing I want to get to at some point in the stream, but we got time yet.
I mean, I'm fine with moving on into that if you want, because I think that is a big portion of, again, the narrative of the book, but also of like who Qui-Gon is as a character in the book too.
Yeah.
And I can't help, we've been reading the NJO, and I can't help but see some like things that are back and forth, because a lot of those early NJO books are a discussion about, what is the Jedi, like what is their role supposed to be in the galaxy. And Qui-Gon comes to, this place in this book where he really is questioning this, where he doesn't believe that the Jedi should try to fix everything, but at the same time he sees a problem that is like really upfront. Like, if we don't try to solve this, are we like morally and ethically on the hook for not trying to solve it, even if we know that we can't solve it? And like the politics of like, I mean, and I say politics, I don't mean like specific policy in this instance.
No.
But like the politics treaties. Of, sure, but like what the Jedi role is in terms of like the Republic and servants of the Republic, and like adherence to Republic law, and what the Chancellor and the Senate want them to do, as opposed to like any sort of like real sense of like, this is what morality is. And Qui-Gon gets kind of lost in the middle of that for a while too, and Obi-Wan too, and they don't see eye to eye on that either.
Well, and that was one of the things that I was nervous isn't the right word. It's really that if this was anybody else writing it, I would have expected it to be not tastes. And I was pretty sure that Claudia was not going to let us down, but she had not written in this time period before, so I was like, original trilogy politics and sequel trilogy politics, she's handled brilliantly. Those are not prequel trilogy politics necessarily. Like there's parallels to be sure, but like not necessarily the same thing. And then so I was worried in this book that it was going to just be what I've seen in Star Wars discourse so many times, which is just the Republic was corrupt, everything was terrible, the Jedi they were always doing the wrong thing all of the time, and it was complicated.
Right.
And I like how Qui-Gon, multiple times in the novel, which has been something that's been brought up in a couple of the new releases, is very into like why the Jedi won't do anything about galactic slavery, which is a completely valid question to ask, and definitely something the Jedi should think about. And what I really liked is the book takes a lot of these big questions and really makes you sit with them through most of the story. And then at the end is where things kind of loop around. And I don't know that the book ever definitively says this is the right thing or this is the wrong thing, but it just very aptly shows you everyone's perspective.
Yeah.
And I love what she did with Yoda. Like, I'm very biased. I'm very picky. I was with Yoda. Yoda is my sweet baby in Star Wars and is very often written poorly. And the beginning of the novel, I was kind of concerned because he was just arguing with Qui-Gon all the time. He would totally do. But then, like, there was just some scene with Yoda where I'm like, no, she gets this little nugget of awesome. And Yoda's talking about it, and he's like, you know, if the Jedi just went around and, like, tried to free everyone and turn every government into a good government, even outside of the Republic, the Jedi run the risk of not just bringing justice, but being the deciders of justice.
Right.
And when does it stop being the Jedi liberating people? When does it start being the Jedi acting almost like gods? Right. And saying, like, because I have the Force, I know better than you.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not what the Jedi should do. And I loved that. And that was a through line with what the Jedi's place was. And that, yeah, you can make an argument that it was bad, that you're not necessarily even wrong, that they could only do things at the behest of the Senate, and that they were beholden to the Chancellor. But at the same time, what else were the Jedi going to do? And that's really what it's like, okay, I get that this is bad, but what was the good alternative?
Right.
And that's where the complicated part comes. I'm sorry, I'm just going. Well, I loved this book so much.
Well, that part of it, you know, it's Captain America: Civil War. It's you know, we want to be able to fix problems that we see because we know what's right and what's wrong, but we also need somebody to be there to say that's too far. Like, that's exactly what it is, and I think Yoda gets that. And I don't think that I don't think Qui-Gon doesn't get it, but I think Yoda as always has a perspective on it that not everyone does, you know, because even when they're just talking about, like, you know, the signing of the treaty in the novel, you know, Yoda says, you know, I think the book does a good job of letting only Zerka people be ones that, like, actively believe that slavery is good. So it doesn't argue that slavery is good or should be allowed. But in terms of, like, the practicality of it, you know, Yoda asks Qui-Gon, you know, we as Jedi and we as the Senate or the Republic have to weigh what's in the best interest of everyone, versus what's in the best interest of the people on this planet. And that may not always be the same thing. And, like, if that hyperspace lane allowed for poverty on dozens of worlds to be alleviated and suffering on dozens of worlds to be alleviated, then, you know, does that justify, you know, a less than ideal situation on Pajal? And Yoda doesn't say that it does, but he's telling Qui-Gon, you know, we have to consider all of that. Like, we can't just get so focused. And I think that's why it's good that you have Yoda being the kind of objective person in this story versus Rael, who has gotten so embedded in the culture that he cannot see beyond. Yeah, well, I've got a lot of thoughts too.
We could almost do a separate stream just on Rahel.
I mean, but even with the politics of it, there's like the difference between like local in terms of like a planet versus like galactic politics. But the role that the Jedi play in that is important too, because they want to be involved, but they don't want to be overly involved. And I think I don't think that's an incorrect impulse.
And I think the book leaves you at a place where the true answer isn't is Yoda right or is Qui-Gon right? The true answer is the Jedi should be working together. Yeah. And Yoda has this, and this is a thing about Yoda that not a lot of people seem to remember, even though it's the most obvious thing about Yoda, and that is Yoda is ridiculously old. Like, his perspective is completely different from the vast majority of characters in Star Wars, and is completely unlike anything that exists on Earth. Like, you cannot find a person on Earth who's 900 years old.
Right.
Unless it's like Larry King. And maybe Larry King. But
well, Bernie Sanders is kind of close.
Bernie Sanders is up there too. But the way Yoda looks at things, he's going to have a completely different perspective on how long something takes. He's going to have seen, you and I can study history and go, well, because this happened in history, we should do it this way. But Yoda lived centuries.
Right.
So, of course, Yoda is going to have the more don't muddy the waters, don't rock the boat, stay calm, take the slow thing. But it's not because he's overly cautious or corrupt or has lost himself. It's because he's old, right?
Yeah.
And Qui-Gon is the guy that wants to go and do the change. And the solution is that they work together. That you have Yoda's, I don't want to say conservative politically, but conservative in terms of he's just been at it for so long and doesn't want to change the status quo as much. You have Yoda's more conservative perspective, and then you have Qui-Gon's desire to just turn things on their head. And if they worked together, that's where the Jedi could be at their strongest. And to me, where the Jedi really lost themselves is when they started, it's the dogma. It's the idea that everyone has to see things the same way.
Right.
Which may or may not be a good tone for today as well.
Well, and I think that it's important that I feel like the decision that has already been made that kind of gets reaffirmed by this book is we're going to default to democracy. We're going to let the people be the ultimate arbiters of what is right or wrong for themselves, both on a galactic level and on a kind of national level. But
yeah, things get muddied. And Dale, going off of what you've said, maybe there's an idealistic way where that works, but I don't think anybody that actually maintains power over somebody else to that level keeps it.
Yeah, I don't think Anakin and Shmi would agree with that.
I don't think Anakin and Shmi would agree with that either. I think their lives were probably a lot rougher than they were allowed to put in a PG movie, and I wouldn't make the assumption that everything was hunky-dory just because a PG movie showed you everything was fine.
Especially in the context of this book, where like we are presented with Zerka servitude as like the worst thing imaginable.
And that, there's another set of characters that we could talk about for ages too. There were so many good characters in this. So many. It was very helpful because Claudia Gray actually posted a fan casting for all of them, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I have to go back and look at that now that I've read the book.
Yeah.
And somebody said earlier that those, I'm blanking on their names now. I could look it up. I've got the book right here.
I was looking at it now. It's Pax and Rahara, right?
I remembered Pax. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely Pax. I think Rahara is the other one, which is not a reflection of their characters. They were great characters. I'm just terrible with names.
But somebody said earlier that they were their favorite side characters in a Star Wars novel in canon.
They were great.
I think that's legitimate.
They were just amazing characters.
And even the stuff with like him being raised by like protocol droids, like that's such a great kind of like character choice
concept
as a writer.
It was so good.
But then also like that they're jewel thieves, but they're really like gemstone like people.
Yeah.
So like they're stealing from these planets, but it's not like they're robbing the crown jewels of
Right,
Alderaan or
they're
something.
robbing beach stones and like what you would put, like if you had landscaping and you bought like the junk rocks that you just put in your landscaping, but those are actually valuable 2 systems over. They're like stealing your landscaping rocks. It was a great concept.
This is not something we talked about off stream either, but what did you think about like the whole Kyber crystal versus Colon crystal with like the shields and the lightsaber thing?
Sorry, I haven't heard that word said out loud, and it would be colon crystals, wouldn't it? That's funny.
I mean, unless it's like choline, but
choline. Let's go with choline because it'll make me giggle less. Choline crystals.
If it's halfway, is that a semicolon crystal?
That's much cleaner than where my mind went. Anyway.
You just needed an irrigation, then it's really clean.
We're professionals. Anyway, the choline crystals. So that was another thing where I'm like, this is interesting. Like, I liked the the fool's Kyber crystals. That was an interesting concept. It makes sense that such a thing would exist. I was a little bit iffy on if they would work in lightsabers, but I guess they would. I don't know. I kind of liked the idea of that, and at the same time, it was like, I'm wary of anything that makes a lightsaber less special, I suppose. Right. But I thought they handled it in a good way, where they were like basically just not as good. And I think it still works because you still require the knowledge of how to make a lightsaber.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make them less special. And obviously there's a big difference between Kybers and because they're living crystals with like actually imbued in the Force.
Right.
And ultimately I was okay with it because I loved the payoff at the end with Obi-Wan and the shield, and like how they thought they were putting one over on Obi-Wan, and then like Obi-Wan unknowingly was fine. Like I liked the way that whole story was woven.
Yeah.
I also really liked the idea that Pax was selling the crystals in such a way where he thought he was like putting one over on Zerka, but then for a while it looked like, well, maybe Pax inadvertently helped Zerka, but then it really wasn't about Zerka. Like, there were so many cool twists and turns in this plot that I really went for. But they were definitely a cool concept. That was probably the most on the nose prophecy in the book. The Kyber that's not Kyber was like the only like literal prophecy in the whole book.
Right.
Unless the Chosen One prophecy really involves an egg. Who knows?
What did you think, while we're talking about Kyber, what did you think about the detail that it is the bond between the Jedi and the Kyber crystal that determines the color of the lightsaber? Yeah, that's what I thought.
No, that did not come from this book. That came from the Ahsoka novel.
Well, I mean, you're right, but
so, you know, Claudia just had to keep with canon. It's not her fault. I've never liked the idea of Jedi mood rings. I really haven't. And I really, what I don't like about it is I liked in old canon. One of the very few things in Legends that I just like really want to stick to my guns about is the red lightsaber crystals were synthetic, and the idea was like Sith were creating a fake crystal, and I thought that was very symbolic of their relationship with the Force, where the Jedi use like real crystals. I get canonically now in current canon why they can't do that, because I mean a synthetic crystal would be the same as these choline crystals. So I get it, like I understand it, it's fine, but like the you choose the color based off of like your bond.
I just want it to be where you can wander around in the caves on Dantooine and just find as many crystals there laying around as you want.
Oh, here's one, and here's one, and here's one, and I can carry 20 lightsabers with me, and it's fine.
Just go to the workbench on the Ebon Hawk and just do whatever you want.
On it. It's great. No, my big stickler on that has always been I just don't like the concept of bleeding for red lightsaber crystals, because it's very human-centric to assume everyone has red blood. And until someone in canon, in universe, points out that it is very human-centric to call bleeding lightsabers, or to say that it's bleeding lightsabers when you turn them red, I will not be happy.
Right.
I need some woke Star Wars character to point that out, and then I will feel better about the Kyber crystal mood rings. But until such a day, I'm going to be upset about it.
But when they first had the shields, I thought it was going to be oh, now I'm blanking on it. The mineral that was in the throne book.
Cortosis?
Cortosis. Yeah, I thought it was going to be a Cortosis
Welcome
thing.
there.
Because we've seen Cortosis armor and shields and stuff before, and I thought it was going to be like a version of that. But I liked how it worked out.
Oh, yeah. And there's so much in this novel that even if it doesn't... I mean, Zerka obviously directly references KOTOR. But there's so much stuff where even if it's not directly referencing KOTOR, it's like thematically referencing KOTOR.
Right.
And just the idea of energy shields was one of those things. One of the reasons why Claudia Gray is our queen is one of the things she said at Celebration. Somebody was asked, she was on one of the panels she was on. I can't remember which of the panels. They were asking all the authors, what, if you could write any Star Wars book, what, like, and it doesn't matter, any character, what would you write? And she said she'd write a Bastila novel. And the whole room erupted, and I don't know how she wasn't just carried out of the room on everyone's shoulders and like coronated somewhere on the Star Wars show stage, because like the room viscerally reacted to Claudia Gray writing a Bastila novel, which will never happen unless they recanonize Bastila.
Does that mean she would be a Bastila Shan stan?
Haha, maybe.
Anyway, I've used that word in a sentence now, and I hate myself.
Just give in. And that's what I did.
So one thing we've not talked about at all, so this book is called Master and Apprentice, so why don't we talk about the Master and Apprentice relationship? Because man. I think this, I mean, obviously I enjoyed all the rest of this stuff, but this is what made the book.
Yes.
And I was talking to you yesterday about this, and one of the things that really stuck out to me most is that both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan spend the whole book thinking that they have failed one another.
Yep.
Only to realize that that's not true. And that's such a real, like, human, like, genuine emotion, but is also just so beautiful for these characters too, where Qui-Gon feels like he has just failed as a master, and Obi-Wan feels so unwanted as a Padawan, and they're both wrong. They just haven't known how to express it to each other.
Yep. I loved everything about how that played out, and I thought it was great because like Obi-Wan spends a lot of time, like, they feel like they're mismatched, right? Like they shouldn't have been paired together, and you find out at the end that he gets Yoda put Obi-Wan with Qui-Gon because Obi-Wan was very rebellious.
Yep.
And so you would think, don't put two rebellious people together. But Yoda was like, no, I'll put Obi-Wan with Qui-Gon because then he'll rebel against Qui-Gon by being a rule follower. That's one of my favorite things in all of Star Wars now. And it's such a Yoda thing.
Yeah.
Conveniently, whenever I talk about this or Jedi Lost, the way I talk about it, you would think they were both about Yoda. Because like I keep going back to how Yoda is in both stories. But anyway, it was a very brilliant realization that I loved so much. But no, and that pain was real, and I liked how they kind of, you know, they figure it out at the end, and they figure out that they both feel like they've been failing each other. And then you get to that last bit where it's Obi-Wan's perspective after Phantom Menace, and he talks about how much it hurt when Qui-Gon seemingly brushed him off for Anakin. And that was very real. Like, human relationships, you get these points of pain, and hopefully you find a way where you can talk through them and become stronger through them. And Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, it's Obi-Wan even says, like, he doesn't remember the bad times as much. He knows that they happened, but he thinks back on his Padawanship with good feelings. But to still have that, but then to still feel that pain when the old problems resurface again, like it was an arrow to my heart.
Right.
In the most unfair way, but it was beautiful.
Well, and
I loved it.
I like it too because, like, they get to a better place by the end of the novel, but it's still not a perfect place. You know, they're still learning, and I don't think Obi-Wan ever gets over what he feels like was the betrayal of Qui-Gon not telling him that he'd been asked to be on the council.
Right.
But he trusts Qui-Gon implicitly to the extent that he says, I don't think this boy should be trained. And I'm even miffed that Qui-Gon kind of pushed me aside to train this boy.
Right.
But I so implicitly trust Qui-Gon that I'm willing to do it. Like, if Qui-Gon thinks there's something here, whether it's the prophecy, whether it's not, Qui-Gon thought there's something to this, and I trust Qui-Gon. And that says a lot about their relationship, even in the end. And like I told you this yesterday too, like, I just want a whole novel that is just Obi-Wan on Tatooine's conversations with Ghost Qui-Gon, because like, I want to see this work out. Like, I want to see where it goes from here.
And it's funny because I reread Master and Apprentice, the short story, and from a certain point of view, like just an hour ago before the stream, and I didn't remember that. I mean, I read from a certain point of view, but I read it when it came out, which is almost 2 years ago now. And it might be 2 years ago now, and in it, Ghost Qui-Gon still feels like he's failed Obi-Wan, and like, even after death, Qui-Gon hasn't gotten over this. And really, anyone out there who either has never read from a certain point of view or read it before Master and Apprentice, you should go revisit that short story. I also reread Time of Death because any excuse to read something Kevin Scott wrote, I will take. And it's about Obi-Wan, so it counted.
John Barry points out in the chat, he says, Master and Apprentice gives new meaning to Obi-Wan's line in episode 1 that if Qui-Gon had just listened to the council, he would be on it. And I think that's true too, but I think Obi-Wan misunderstands that a little bit too. Or at least I think the way we as fans took what Obi-Wan said to mean kind of misses the point, because I don't think Qui-Gon chose not to be on the council because he disagreed with them or didn't want to listen to them or thought that their bureaucracy was like problematic. I think he had a particular idea of what his calling in the Force was, and he knew that he could not do that if he was on the Jedi Council. And I think that shows a kind of self-knowledge too that I really admire. This idea that I know that I can't be what I need to be by doing this. What did you think about that? We talked about that some.
Well, I think that ties back to what we were talking about earlier with the relationship, the dynamic between Qui-Gon and Yoda, because I will always take it back to Yoda. And I think the idea is Qui-Gon wasn't rejecting outright the Jedi Council. Like you said, like he saw his role, and he wanted to fulfill his role. And his role wasn't to defy the council intrinsically, unless the council was like wrong in the specific situation. His role was to be the guy that went out and found the chosen one.
Right.
And I think that's very relevant. And that's what I really liked. And I think this is a thing I've been tweeting about. You and I have been talking about. My favorite thing about this book is it just finally, it's like I will never hopefully have to hear the words that Qui-Gon Jinn is a great Jedi ever again. Because boy, have I gotten sick of that argument. I've been saying over and over again, now the only thing gray about Qui-Gon is the last name of the author who wrote him, and that's it. And Qui-Gon wasn't anti-Jedi and wasn't anti all of these other things. He knew his role, and you can't stop him from fulfilling his role. He's gonna do what he's feeling called to do by the Force, but he still ultimately believes in the light side. And Jared, you know I'm gonna argue. Welcome, by the way. Good to see you. He's gonna go and do what he's gonna do, but I think he ultimately believed in the Jedi. He just wanted the Jedi to be better.
I mean, and it's so important that it's literally on the back cover of the book.
Right. Yeah.
Like that. It says.
Shall I read it for the class? So
go for it.
This quote. This is from leading member, Grand Master of the Grey Jedi Order, Qui-Gon Jinn. It says, quote, "It matters. It matters which side we choose, even if there will never be more light than darkness. Even if there can never be more joy in the galaxy than there is pain, for every action we undertake, for every word we speak, for every life we touch, it matters. I don't turn towards the light because it means someday I'll win some sort of cosmic game. I turn towards it because it is the light.
Yep.
Sounds pretty Grey Jedi to me.
I mean, but that's so, like, that I think perfectly encapsulates who Qui-Gon is, though.
Yeah.
Like he says, I'm not choosing this because it's a dogma I agree with. I'm choosing it because it's right. Like, I think that both proves that there's no such thing as a Grey Jedi, but also shows how Qui-Gon is different. Because I think we are presented with, I mean, and Obi-Wan is kind of given to us as this type of person. I'm following the rules because they're the rules. You know, I'm following our mandate because it is our mandate. But Qui-Gon is following our mandate because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's where the distinction is. It's not a gray thing.
No.
But
also, greetings, Yagi. I see you out there.
I mean, some people don't. There are people that believe that, like, there is an order of Grey Jedi that has their own code and is a thing. Yep. Like I don't necessarily completely disagree with what you're saying there, but that's not what the internet says. Like, the internet goes way beyond that, and that's
there's a Grey Jedi code that gets circulated every so often, and I hate it so much, but it's fine.
But even then, I think this presents Qui-Gon as a lot less sort of gray in that kind of point of view sense, too.
Well, as we get near the end, maybe what we should do then is to go back to something we mentioned earlier, talk about Rael, who, if there is such a thing as a Grey Jedi, it would be Rael and not Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
But there's a big conversation in the book that's so basically Rael, for those who don't know, who haven't read or what have you, is a former Padawan of Count Dooku, just like Qui-Gon was, and he went through some trauma, let's say, and the Jedi Council sought where he probably should have gone through a lot of therapy and a lot of like retraining. He was given a very strange mission, and he was put in, basically, he, as a Jedi, like, ruled the planet for years.
For like a decade.
And while he was there, he got a little loose on the rules, and there's one particularly interesting conversation in the book where Rael is having this hookup with a barkeep lady, and Qui-Gon, like, literally just walks into the room unannounced, and he's like, well, this is awkward. And I'm like, am I really reading this in a Star Wars novel? I think I'm really reading this in a Star Wars novel. Okay. And then Chicky Poo leaves, and then they have this talk about it. And it's like this age-old argument, but it's like this discussion I've had with so many people about, like, well, the Jedi can't have attachments, but can they just have, like, attachmentless sex? Maybe. I'm like, you are someone who wants a sex loophole, and that's the only reason why you're thinking this, but okay. Anyway, I'm salty because I've had this conversation with so many people who think they're original. And I really liked it because, again, leading Grand Master of the Grey Jedi Order is like, no, that's wrong, though.
Yeah.
And that's not how that works, because you're still kind of giving into your passions. It doesn't matter if you don't, even if you don't somehow have an attachment to this person, like, you're still giving into your passions. And then Rael was like, didn't you fall in love with someone? And he was like, yeah, but that was different. And then we don't talk about it, so I'm waiting for the Qui-Gon love story. Claudia Gray, you cannot just tease me with this and then not follow it up. So I hope this is involved somewhere in one of your Del Rey talks. I'm sure you're an avid listener to our StreamCast, and I'm telling you that I need this story. But anyway, it was kind of an interesting conversation. And I don't remember how we got on this point.
Well, I think there's something to it too, that Qui-Gon is pointing out the kind of hypocrisy in it. Like it's like you say, it's a justification for what you already want to do, rather than like a philosophical choice. Like, and I think that's part of the problem with it there. there also, and I think that again emphasizes the non-grayness of Qui-Gon's.
Exactly.
Like, because if it was a philosophical point, Qui-Gon might have been more inclined to agree, but it wasn't.
Right. It wasn't. It was just Rael was lonely and trying not to think of the fact that he killed his Padawan. And, basically what that was.
And before we, that's what he spent 10 years doing, is trying to find therapy without going to therapy.
Yeah, because that always works.
But I love that Rael learns the lesson, though.
He does.
Because, I mean, as I was reading this, I kept telling you I hate this guy. Like, this guy is the worst. He is my least. Like, he is a jerk. He is terrible. And then the last scene that he was in the novel, like moved me in like real ways. Because
I had to sit there as you're texting me all about all of this, and I'm like, just finish the book, Django. Just finish the book, Django.
And we'll get more Rael next week. We're going to talk about Dooku Jedi Lost next week. By the way,
so he'll be back.
So he'll be in that. But like,
again, I feel like we could have a whole Rael StreamCast. There's so much to unpack.
Maybe we should. But like, I don't know if we should say, because I know there's still people that haven't finished it yet. But like that last thing, like you see that he has changed in like a real and meaningful way, and in a meaningful way that makes up for that, at least made up for the fact that I hated him for most of the book.
Right.
And I think that speaks to like the righteousness of the point that Qui-Gon is making, and also to the writing skill of Claudia Gray. Like,
that's true too.
Like, I think those things are both there.
Well, and I think with Rael, to kind of go back to things, I keep making KOTOR comparisons, which is kind of odd, but I have this feeling that Claudia Gray must be a KOTOR fan. But in KOTOR, Jolie Bindo, the bald old man, tells a story of why he left the Jedi, and that the Jedi failed him. And you keep thinking that the Jedi failed him because they were mean to him or they didn't understand him. And then you learn that Jolie lost faith in the Jedi because the Jedi showed him mercy. Right? Like, Jolie got married and trained a Padawan, like, against the Council's will, who fell to the dark side and killed other Jedi. And after he did that, the Council forgave him. And that, he saw, was a failing. Now, I think Jolie was a little bit wrong to see it that way, but he was young when it happened, and he's Jolie's Jolie. But that's what happened to Rael. So Rael had a Jedi Padawan. They were on a mission. Rael broke protocol to complete the mission a different way.
Mostly because he just likes to fight.
Mostly because he likes to fight, and that Qui-Gon knew that. And as a result, there's this piece of technology that can temporarily mind control you, basically, which is not that out of the blue. That's how the clones executed Order 66.
Right.
We saw similar mind chips in the Aftermath trilogy, so it's not like this is like crazy technology that Claudia Gray has come up with. But his Padawan is temporarily like taken out of her own mind, and Rael has to decide, like, she's going to kill everybody, and he ends up killing his Padawan to save the life of everyone else because there's this crazy mind-controlled Jedi running around, and he's haunted by this decision, and that decision is ultimately what leads to, I mean, I guess the final ultimate twist we don't have to spoil for everyone because not everyone in the chat has read the book, but that's what makes him blind, shall we say, to what ultimately happens at the end.
Yeah.
But the Jedi, after all that happens, are like, well, and they talk about Rael's a big precursor to Anakin. He came to the Jedi when he was 5 instead of 9.
Right.
But that was still old, and he was always unconventional. And the Jedi took this guy who really probably just needed time at the temple to be around people, and they're like, let's actually give him a mission away from the temple, or he can go in the unconventional and like find himself. And I think they picked it to put him with the would-be queen, because she would fill the role that she ultimately filled in his mind, only instead of a healing thing, it became a crutch. But that's a flaw with the Jedi that, again, blew up with Claudia, that she understood, is the Jedi, one of their biggest flaws is how compassionate and merciful they can be. And it's weird to say that that's a flaw, but they so wanted to forgive Rael, just as in Legends they forgave Jolie, that they actually hurt them, both of these characters, and they hurt Rael, where Rael needed the guidance and he needed the discipline, and he needed somebody to go, okay, you just screwed up, like, we're gonna go back to basics and like help you figure out your life. And so they gave him a rope for him to hang himself with.
Right. Well, and I think it's not coincidence that Qui-Gon, a character who feels like he should have been held more to account, is the one that gives him the advice that changes him.
Yes.
Like, I think there's something narratively there to that too. But we're going to talk more about Rael next week and probably the week after if our plans
go according. Yeah.
Right. So there'll be more of this to come for sure.
Definitely. But yeah, we're hitting that time. Is there any final thing, I guess?
I'll just say again, Claudia Gray does such a good job being a steward of these characters. These are characters that I care a lot about. Obi-Wan is in my top 2 or 3 Star Wars characters. I have a lot of admiration and respect for Qui-Gon, more than I even did before after this. I love the focus that we're getting on the prequel trilogy right now. And I think if this is not my favorite Star Wars book, it's in my top 2 or 3.
Definitely.
And if you've not read this out there, I know a couple people are reading it right now. I can't recommend it in stronger terms.
Yeah. I'm the same way. Like I said, I walked in, this is my time period. This is my topic of discussion. These are my characters. Like, when I think of Rome, like what a Jedi Knight and what Jedi Knights look like, and what a Master and a Padawan relationship, which is something that's always fascinated me, what that looks like. I always go to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. This was a writing where I was already strongly biased by Legends in a way that I'm really not biased in any other time period with any other characters, and I loved it. It was perfect. I wouldn't change a part of the story, and I loved the way the plot twisted and turned. I loved, like we keep saying, there's really no other way to put it other than the way they make it. She makes it complicated,
right?
And I hope we get to see more stories like this in this time period.
Yeah. But I think that is mostly going to do it for us today.
Yeah.
So be sure to follow us on all the things, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. You can search for the Star Wars Refuge on all of those things, or follow the links there. You can find us on Discord, where we'll be happy to talk more about this. Like we said, next week our plan is to talk about the Dooku Jedi Lost audio drama by Kevin Scott. And then the week after that, we're probably going to talk about like both of them and how things connect, and a lot of other things, because there's so much we want to say about this, and these things only last an hour.
And mind you, we've been having these conversations off stream for hours. Yes, exactly. Claudia is queen and Kevin is king, and that is who rules over my bookshelf.
But until next week, that's going to do it for us today, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.